as well as politics?
Yeah.
Does it have a transformational quality to it? Does it really ultimately upset, and really, instead of rocking the boat, does it really sink the ship? Even though it's been associated with, quote, conservative revolution, but it's not conservative as we understand it in the United States as conservative. You know, conservative to Heidegger, Junger, and probably even Carl Schmitt to a lesser degree. I don't know Schmitt as well, but I do know Junger and Heidegger fairly well. Could be a return to Hölderlin's poems, you know, a return to an idea of the German nation, you know, that you see in Fichte, you know, in some people, the address to the German nation, etc. And in Heidegger, you know, thing that the Germans were the modern Greeks, you know, in a sense. This is really what the project was about. And it was about the mobilization of the Volk, not as Das Mann, but as, you know, ultimately a transformative populace that would address, you know, this philosophical background, such as Kant, Hegel, you know, Fichte, Schelling, you know, you can go on down the line, before Wolff, Baumgarten, you know, and the aesthetics, and Lessing, Lacan, you know, all these great texts that were produced, right, etc. So this was no longer, again, I mean, you could think of it, you know, since he deals with Descartes here, and we're going to talk about that today, there is this dealing with Descartes in a very pronounced sense in Being and Time and trying to get outside of the Cartesian moment, or the Cartesian cogito, which he thinks is part of the problem of our modern, you know, lack of being able to think the totality, and to go back to some of the language in Adorno, the whole and the parts. What he doesn't mention here is that, you know, Martin Luther, at least to the German nation, was a rethinking of the German language in relationship to Scripture, right, and against the Catholic Church, right? And this is very important for the development of modern subjectivity. How does the modern subject come about? How did this break happen? You know, from on the one hand, the Neoplatonism in the Renaissance, this Venetian system, right, that rediscovered the classical world, versus that of another kind of dialogism, if you will, between the German and the Greek. Right, this is Heidegger's moment here. What Greek is another story. You know, what Greek are we speaking? And what's speaking Greek? Because being is supposed to speak Greek, according to, the ancient Greek. This is what it speaks. And Derrida is critical of this. And, and some of you that know, going back to earlier discussion today, in Finnegan's Wake of Joyce, Jew-Greek, Greek-Jew, two extremes meet. And that's maybe one thing worth thinking about, the new Greece and its Jew, right, in a certain way. Where's the Marx and the Heidegger together, right? Or what does the new Greece look like? Is that the new, communist moment? I'm speculating. I mean, I'm obviously, really just trying to go with a little bit of reverie here, right? In some ways is the new moment, this interiorized dialogue, if you will, with the Greek, right? To open up possibilities in the wrong turn that has taken place for 2,000 years of Judeo-Christian, codes, Judeo-Christian, value systems, of which we have obviously from Nietzsche, this transvaluation in terms of the history of philosophy. We certainly have it in Marx, the end of philosophy, right? In terms of the beginning of the new materialistic dialectic. And in Heidegger, it's the end of philosophy as well, even though he's still doing systematic philosophy in 1927, what we're reading, in terms of the background. Because one of his most famous pieces later is the end of philosophy and the task of thinking. Right? The task of thinking. The philosophy has met its closure. Right? And Adorno says, in the same breath, no poetry after Auschwitz, which we didn't get to earlier today. I was going to bring that up and then maybe try to have a discussion in the earlier class, but we won't. We'll save that for the next time. So anyway, so what you really have, I mean, I think, in order to maybe not synthesize or integrate two great thinkers such as Adorno and Heidegger, who are both on different sides of both a left and a right ontology, if you want to think of it this way. You have a left ontology and there's a right ontology, right, in some ways. And Heidegger is certainly representative of this conservative ontology, which is, again, this reading, and this is the poet that is most significant to him, of the homecoming, is Frederick Hölderlin. Right? Frederick Hölderlin.
He wrote the poem about the Rhine River or something?
He did write the poem about the Rhine River, of which the Der Ister is the name of the movie. Yeah, Der Ister is the poem, yes, which Heidegger actually reads in the film. You can hear Heidegger reading the poem, yeah, in the film, Der Ister. So anyway, but also Homecoming, and for Heidegger, again, someone who is a translator, because if you were in the academy at this time, and remember, to my mind, Socrates, and I think this is borne out, obviously, in Black Athena by Martin Bernal and other places, and I've certainly given this a lot of thought, being Greek and hearing all this privilege of the Greeks. Greece is an invention of the 19th century. This is where Greece, there's this rebirth of classical values with the rereading of Plato and Aristotle during the so-called Renaissance, but the Renaissance is not a term used until the 19th century by Nietzsche's friend who invented it, Jakob Burckhardt, right? Civilization, yeah, the Renaissance, right? So anyway, these are inventions of 19th century. So anyway, let me just do this real quickly. So you have the three partners who plant the tree of liberty. They're all in school together. So you have Friedrich Schelling, Friedrich Hölderlin, and George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, all in the same school, and they plant the tree of liberty. The tree of liberty is that Germany is way behind, or the Prussian state is way behind the French and the French Revolution, which everybody knows is 1789, and the reaction started right away and ended up in the Napoleonic, moment, of whom Hegel was very fond of, by the way. When the emperor came, the world spirit had appeared, 1807 in Vienna.
But Adorno makes an interesting point about that.
Good.
About
Okay.
Hegel. He says in, I think, lecture 9 or 8, he says a cheap reading of Hegel would say he really welcomed the Napoleon as the new state, the new sort of absolute achievement that we can hope for. But in fact, for Hegel, it was actually the best possible situation of the worst possible situation to be in, which is Napoleon could overcome the deadening effects of liberal dogma and the liberal mediocrity of everyday bourgeois life. In that way, Hegel is very radical.
Yes,
it's kind of
no question about it. Yeah. No, I agree.
He's not a statist, as it's read sometimes.
He's a statist maybe later. I think, you could have a conversation with Adorno about this, that he becomes more and more part of this statist and more conservative as time goes on. And this is a tendency in a lot of these.
He didn't agree with that. Adorno didn't seem, at least in that lecture.
No, I understand, and that's 1807. What's that?
Beethoven
too.
He ripped up the Third Symphony, which was dedicated to Napoleon.
I know.
He ripped it up when Napoleon declared himself.
I know that. No, I'm aware of that. Yeah. So anyway, but these were the three, people together, and again, the object here was Hölderlin, of whom Adorno may have talked about in passing, but Adorno is high modernist. Heidegger is not a quote modernist. This is important to keep in mind too. Adorno is the high modernist. This is no question about this. He's very much for, and I don't know if you picked up in the introduction to dialectics, the stabs at Lukács, which I think are very well founded. That somehow Lukács stayed in a very static and a very normalizing kind of dialectic around such concepts as the historical novel, social realism, right, and did not move, and then the destruction of reason did not have an understanding at all of Nietzsche. You just put him in a category of irrational thinkers. Although, again, I would give Lukács a little more credit. I think he understood Nietzsche as the highest representative and most clever and intelligent representative of hot bourgeois thought, and this kind of move back to a radical aristocracy. But again, you have a Mandarin class, such as a Lukács, such as an Adorno. Lukács certainly was part of a Mandarin class before that, but a Mandarin modernist class trying to think through, right, the 20th century and where we're going, and one doing so very dialectically. The other one, Heidegger, who is basically in the countryside, stays in the provinces, did not get the job in Berlin, so he stayed, in the rural areas, right, in a sense, and at big German universities, Tübingen, Freiburg, etc. Yeah, but went back to the homecoming of Hölderlin. There was a kind of nostos, if you will, in the positive sense, a nostalgia, right, in a positive sense that is operative in his thinking. Right? So the nostalgia, you could see the nostalgia is for the fundamental question, which we've lost, right?
Yes.
We have forgotten the question of being. And in that forgetfulness, right, again, our memory must take us back, which somehow, in its retrieve, in its repetition, will give us once again a memory that becomes futural, right? This is not, quote, just dwelling in the past. Yeah, or dwelling there in the past. This is for a futural moment. So I'm just making some suggestions today, and I have to elaborate this maybe further as we go on. One could suggest, out of Heidegger, that being in time is really a political work. It's a new ethos for a new politics, right? Based on, the ontological, ontic distinctions, right? And based on, Dasein's average everydayness and its everydayness, a privileging of the everyday, right? As well as becoming a kind of sense of a politics, if you will, of authenticity. A politics of authenticity, that one has to make one's innermost possibility possible, right? And then somewhat actual. So when he talks about the Kantian problematic possibility, again, I emphasize again, possibility is higher than actuality, right? It's always the possible that is at stake, not the realism of the moment, not that we're defeated by the tax bill, these kind of things. Yeah, please.
Well, is it good to have a politics based on nostalgia?
Well, the nostalgia here, to me, I would divide this into several kinds of nostalgia. In Heidegger's case, it's a restorative and a futural nostalgia. It's a return home. Okay? Because nostalgia, the way I'm using it, is not the way we commonly use it in English. It's based on nostos as a homecoming. So,
finding your true self.
As your friend Camus once said, right? Said, Odysseus was faced with a choice. That choice was between immortality on the island with Circe, which I, of course, would have chosen, or a return home. And Odysseus chose the second one. Yeah, he chose against the goddess to return home right anyway. He chose monogamy over, in some ways.
Well,
Return to Penelope, the return to Penelope, right?
And he also-
Penelope's web.
And he
How could you
also,
not choose
Anyway,
goddess?
so what I'm really saying
Yeah, he
here is
also had a
this
son, too.
nostalgia is about a return home. Then the question is, what is home, and what is Heidegger really referencing here? And when we get into these concepts about world, right? For Heidegger, maybe home first begins with world, with the Umwelt, the aroundness, right? Environment being a very bad translation. The surrounding world, the whole, encompassing, if you will. around us, right? And it might be a better, better thing about
Uses
it.
environment.
So when she uses
I don't
environment?
think she does, no.
Good.
I think
good.
the other translation.
This
They
one
used
is-
environment? Okay. Anyway, so I mean, I'm using this in a sense, because, if you want to problematize, look, I'm narrativizing this. This really isn't, this is kind of like storytelling within philosophy. But if you want to think about Derrida, again, the Sephardic. No, I know you didn't. No, I'm thinking of him because you remind me. Yeah, when you think about Derrida as Sephardic Jew, that's the wanderer, right? The one who's always erring, who doesn't have a home, is at rest nowhere. I mean, this was always, to me, that the Jews followed the gypsies, right? In terms of the attacks by National Socialism, by the Nazis ultimately, is really because they didn't have home. Not only the relationship to international finance and other things like this and this kind of racial policies, but it's also about the wanderingness. They're stateless, right? They're without home, without identity of a country, in a sense, at least in
This goes
48.
back to the Bible of
Yes, of
wandering
course.
in the
Of
desert.
course, yes.
And Derrida comes out of a kind of desert experience, and he's not European.
Like a good Buñuel film, Simon in the Desert.
Simone.
Simone, yeah, I know. I just tried to make him more Hebrew. Anyway. All right, so listen, I mean, I use this word advisedly, in a sense. And again, so Derrida is bringing in those who do not have home, in a certain way, and maybe a different abyssal plane. Because again, Heidegger is very upset about roots being uprooted, in a way. This is really his problem in modernity. We're really uprooted. We no longer have relationship to world. We no longer have relationship to, to the ground, right? What?
It's
Yeah.
interesting because that's
Yeah.
sort of the continuation in a different way of the manifesto, Communist manifestos, right? Sort of what does capitalism bring? It brings constant uprootedness. Right?
Yes.
It's sort of, it's the same critique in a different way, right? It's same although Marx praises it, right, in the manifesto as a movement beyond the staleness of feudal society,
Right.
never changing, kind of boring,
Right.
whatever. But now it's taken to the extreme, right? 200 years of history by Heidegger's time, 150 years of history. It's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, Das Mann could be, in some ways, for Heidegger,
okay.
the other term of the proletariat, right? Right? In some ways. And if you go back and you read, what was the political, capture was really about how do we, control the masses. This was the 20th century's, call. You can see this in Pareto, you see this in Michel's, and elites, all these political theorists who come up with how are we going to control what's coming up, a revolt of the masses by Ortega y Gasset. So all of these become texts and reasoning by many to think of this, So
it's
you're
interesting.
contending,
I started reading The Worker just a little bit.
Yeah.
I got it.
yes,
There are long passages there of kind of celebrating Lenin and about this whole notion of the 5-year plan. Because for him, who's kind of a similar conservative to Heidegger.
Yes.
I mean, for Junger, the 5-year plan was something like a way to control the proletariat and the liberal and the capitalists.
Right.
Sort of defang the capitalists from leadership role in the everyday, and sort of subsume them under this new type of existence that's different. Like it forces a difference.
Right.
I don't know what happens later in the book, but that's the beginning.
yes, no, I do. I'm not going to spoil it for you, but anyway. The common enemy for both, say, the Leninist break and the Heideggerian, critique is liberal democracy. Is definitely monopoly capital on the one hand and liberal democracy. So there's a common antagonists that are going on, in some ways. And, no accident that there's a Hitler-Stalin pact, too. If you really begin to start thinking about this, what philosophically is going on, what principles are moving this at a certain time. Yeah.
You don't see that, basically as a pragmatic.
Well, it's pragmatic, but at
for
the same
Stalin,
time.
it's survival, basically.
Yes.
I
But I mean, but again, it
Yeah.
was a survival of the proletariat, of a
Of
vision,
the
right?
proletariat state.
Yeah, the proletariat state.
In internal documents of Hitler's, like
Right.
planning for the war, there's a certain different language that Hitler uses when he talks about Stalin versus like Chamberlain or the French or the U.S. president. There's like, it's sort of seen as like a closeness,
Right.
but from the point of view of an absolute negation,
I
So
see.
that's interesting,
Yeah.
Whereas he talks about Chamberlain in the worst possible tone, spineless.
He is spineless.
He was
In Stalin, there's almost like
Peace at
there's
any
almost
cost,
he can-
like my union.
Yeah.
I mean, I have to get that in.
It's on YouTube now.
And our president has resigned.
Of the university?
Yes, not at the
No,
university, at the
president.
union, unfortunately not the university. That would have been a productive moment. But no, the president of the university signed a 6-year new contract worth millions of dollars, and the president of the union stepped down last week, about a week after the announcement of the president's 6-year contract, which I of course not going to read anything into that. But, right. So anyway, but that's peace at all costs, labor peace at all costs. That's basically
Get
the.
another job, something?
I don't know. She said it was for personal reasons. Right. After a meeting with, I won't say this on the YouTube. Who knows? But I'll tell you guys later. Yeah. Anyway, I want to go. I want to go to the text again. I want to keep this as an open question. This whole question, since Athens and Jerusalem has been a very active part of philosophical discourse since day one, really, in a way. Yeah.
That's what Mark Leela's current book and the new one that's just reviewed in the London Review of Books focuses on that distinction too. And
I'm sorry, whose book?
Mark Leela, there's a review. Just came out
And
in the London
focuses
Review
on
of
the
Books.
distinction for
Well,
what
among other
purpose?
things.
I mean,
He's it's interesting.
No, I know who Mark Leela is.
Yeah, I know. He's basically virulently against identity politics. I mean,
Right.
he's an uber liberal, but
Right.
but he has good things to say about Leo Strauss. Very interesting stuff. I thumbed through the Shipwreck book, which is basically a compilation of his new NYRB stuff. But the new one, he really takes off after Arendt, Jaspers, and Heidegger. One of his main themes, apparently, is when philosophers go off the track and jump into political action, or move into beyond philosophy to thought, and what happens,
You mean they move from philosophy to politics?
Something like
See,
that.
the
Yeah,
problem
yeah, right.
really with all that is that
Yeah.
most philosophy has politics in it.
Of course.
And
yeah.
if that practice is there, you can separate, you can distantiate the philosophical conceptual nexus sometimes from
Yeah.
the political, but you cannot take the philosophy out of the political,
Yeah.
out of the politics
No.
itself, So, I mean, this is
Yeah.
a sharp dividing line.
Right.
And one of the best people on this is actually Badiou, on a work called Philosophy and Politics. And, and in Gramsci's sense, I mean, that we studied last semester, if you will, the study of philosophy is always a political endeavor, because the philosophy of praxis, of doing, is always in the world, right? And if Heidegger is going to have a category called Dasein, or being in the world, right? That's a politics to begin with. You're in a world. You're in a world, of social relations to begin with, right? And this is always happening. But I understand where he's coming from. That's an age-old thing since Plato's seventh letter in the history
he
of
goes back
philosophy.
to,
He goes back to Plato and Syracuse.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
But the thing that bothers me the most, having read the book there, is he totally misreads the relationship among the triangle of Jaspers, Arendt, and Heidegger. And he uses it to really scathingly critique Arendt, that Jaspers was the better man because he refused to have anything to do with Heidegger because Heidegger wouldn't express remorse, whereas Arendt couldn't stay away from Heidegger, so she finally had to, I mean, this is such a trivialization.
Liberal machinations.
It's just disgusting. It has nothing to do with the complexity of the relationship between Arendt and...
No, and also, if you remember where we started here, just to go back, because I think this is important to remember these things. When we looked at the psychology of the worldviews and the basic problems of phenomenology, what Heidegger is really arguing against is Jaspers there. That philosophy is not a worldview. It's not a world, intuition or a worldview.
And they were starting.
He's really talking about this. That this
philosophy.
becomes a worldview philosophy, and this was what Jaspers became known for a little while. Then he became the philosophy of existence and others after that. But he was in dialogue. It's very much like Adorno. If you want to read this like Adorno and Lukács, or Adorno sometimes with Benjamin, Heidegger, has conversations with Jaspers, sometimes hidden, sometimes active. So it's not like they're just writing again in this vacuum, and all of a sudden being appeared to revealed itself to Heidegger, and he puts it down in some systematic philosophical.
Right, and they were starting to draw apart even well before.
Yes,
well
absolutely,
before the Nazis
absolutely,
or anything else.
Absolutely. I mean, this is the stuff that a lot of academic paper and toilet paper is wasted on. I mean, this is.
I hate to say this. Well, it's not the London Review; they just report it.
I understand. No, London Review is a good publication, etc. So anyway, what I'd like to do today is for us to go somewhat carefully through. I'm sorry that some people aren't here, but anyway, we can always go back to it in some ways. To go back to world. And the section where we left off last time, I think we basically started on world, if I remember correctly. And I used as you remember, the types of scene that you have a looking around in the Umwelt, right? You have the world of looking back as consideredness. And then, of course, the looking at oneself, which is transparent in this use of the verb sicht, sight. Or the common noun, I'm sorry, sight, right? So this is a kind of interesting moment. Again, to keep the distinction of, and I think that's on the board too, the Zumhanden and Vorhanden over there, the world as ethos. I put environment. I think ethos is a better translation for us to look at this one role of world and worlding. The world is ethos. You have the Zumhanden, which are things that are ready to hand, to be used, the usefulness, right? Against commodification, if you will. I mean, you can certainly read that in here. Versus that of the Vorhanden, which is much more of an attitude, right? That's, much more science works. So the objects are taken as things, right, in the world, and this is how science operates, through objectivity, this drive for objectivity, right? And, again, I was mentioning last week that abecchio is to throw against the object. The object comes from when you object, you're throwing against something. And this leads me to, Heidegger's, so you throw against, right? It's a dominative term. So in some ways, Heidegger, in using this concept of the objecthood and treating the world as objects, is actually beginning to give a critique of domination. Yep. Give a critique of domination, which again, a lot in common with the Frankfurt School. Marx never really used that kind of language, but in the German, the Herrschaften, Bildungen, excuse me, I can spell it. Herrschaften, mastery, master text, right, if you will, and the dual, right, master and cultural formation, or master domination over the images, right, and how things are produced. So this is a ongoing Herrschaft and Begriffen, master and then cultural formation or image formations, right? And this is Nietzsche at work, that Nietzsche really thought of, you know, the global sphere, if you will, in terms of these relations that was laying out, are ones of domination and power. And this is why, say, Junger writes a book on dominion. Yeah, so they're very interested in power and master formations within that power, in a sense. Which we as Americans are always, you know, our ears get very tin when we hear the word master, or mastery, or, you know, my master, you know, kind of thing. Although, you know, that goes on in everyday life, unconsciously, you know, here. But we don't like that language. You know, I remember, you know, some French philosophers, they talk about, you know, Althusser, my master. Mandre de Con, you know, they have even the language in their academic systems, you know, the mastery of the content. You know, yeah, so there's a kind of mastery of thought, master formations here. But anyway, he is going to kind of try to undo this domination. This is another thing that's going on in this text, you know, that one can work with in terms of the environmental front. Anyway, let's try to go through some of the stuff on Descartes today, and we can go back and forth. I do want to mention, though, vis-a-vis Adorno, on page 130, the existential constitution of the there, and this is section 29, Dasein as attunement. How much more musical can you get than attunement here? You know, is ontically what is most familiar and an everyday kind of being in a mood. Prior to our psychology is a field which more of a still lies at. We see this phenomena as a fundamental existential, and we'll outline its structure. We're going to get to that later, but I just wanted to let you know again, even though Heidegger doesn't write about music, it is this kind of everyday life and some sense of musicality, you know, or hearing again, because hearing is again very, very important. Section 29.
Section 29.
Yeah, you can get it by sections. The whole book is divided into 82 sections. I mean, 83.
One thing that I noticed.
Yeah, sure, please, yeah.
Because I was trying to review this section,
Section 29.
is this idea of useful things.
Yes.
She writes, and usefulness and in its utility is referred to in the other translation as, what is the word now?
What's Vorhanden or Zoomhanden?
Equipment.
And Zoonhanden, it's what?
They say
equipment. Yeah, well, yeah, this is another thing.
People go on about equipment when they talk about Heidegger.
Yes, they do. Equipment primordial of equipment, right, in a certain way,
And she's
which
saying
gives a
useful
more
things.
industrialist, industrial sense to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the terms are, I mean, I'm not sure which one's more clear in a way, actually.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, you know, I guess it's the handiness.
Mm-hmm.
You know, again, it has this handiness
Right.
to it, and it's useful to conceptualization as well. You know, it's not only objectivity, you know, the Zoomhanden, but the readiness to hand is the use. What use does it have to me? You know, I talked a little bit, if you remember, about Stiegler kind of working off this into technics and time. You know, he's taking that as a, you know, and the Vorhanden could be looked at how Stiegler begins to talk about, memory storage. You know, he can, as he talks about hyponemata as
Gary Dunn
industrialization of
write
memory.
about Heidegger's hand?
He did. I told you. Yeah, I did. The Hand of Heidegger. Yeah. In which he, I think, made the remark about what Heidegger said about Hitler, that he had such beautiful hands. Yeah.
But it's also throughout the book.
I'm being, yeah.
To hand,
Yes.
ready to hand.
Yes, of course.
Present
It's
at
on the
hand,
hand,
ready
yes.
to hand.
And also begriffen is the conceptual, when you conceptualize in German, you're taking it, you're grasping it in your hand. So, yeah, yeah.
Is it
So
true to
this,
say that,
yeah.
like Stiegler, when he talks about the question of memory, the externalization of memory,
Right,
that's always part of the human experience for Stiegler,
right, of course.
But for Heidegger, that's a problem. The externalization of the memory into a tool like the typewriter stands in the way of, right? And thus the priority in Heidegger is the return to the hand, right? To the
Well, to understand, yes, the readiness to
machine,
the
the
hand.
externalization
It's the machine, the
is a
externalization.
problem or can be a problem.
He was very much against the agricultural combines and machines. You know, you have to remember, in some ways, this is a very anti-modernist text. Very, I mean, in that way.
But not Luddite, right, you said?
No, he's not Luddite. No, he's not a Luddite. No,
The
no,
work
I
of-
wouldn't use that.
Yeah,
in
that's
this
my
case.
favorite quote. The
Yeah.
work of the peasant does not challenge the soil of the field.
Uh-huh.
That's a Heidegger quote.
Yes, it is.
Well, it's in.
incredible.
Yeah.
I love it. I'm probably.
Whereas the combine,
Yeah, I'm just
poisons
plowing in
and-
the
It-
fields
it's-
of us.
You know, he's
Yeah.
explaining the difference. That's in the question
Right.
concerning technology. But the difference between poesis
Yes,
and
yes.
challenging.
Yes,
Bringing
exactly.
forth and challenging.
Yes,
forth.
bringing forth and challenging forth, and yeah, and the Poean, again, to go back to Holderlin, that's what you're going to bring forth is that homecoming, right? The, you know, and also, you know, as again I said, that Heidegger is again attacking, if you will, the agricultural combines of the period. He cannot stand the rapacious nature of capitalism and what it's done to the, you know, even though he doesn't use the word
He never
capitalism.
uses the term,
in.
never
Yeah.
uses the
He's
term.
looking at what are the philosophical concepts behind this monstrosity that we're living in, and why did you get to this? See, this is the difference between him and Adorno in a lot of ways. Heidegger is asking, I think, a more radical question. Where did this Ursprung, you know, how does it emerge? What is the emergence of these things? You know, how did we really get here? You know, and then how are we going to spring into the future without having all this happening? And if you really look at this, I mean, you know, both Adorno and Heidegger are against progress. I mean, they think of it as an illusion, right? And, you know, we in America always say it's progress or they're progressive or something like that. That's not really,
It's not progress
it's an
necessarily.
illusion to them completely, yeah, to both of them. But on the other hand, it's Heidegger who's asking, I think, at least a question philosophically, and may not be as, you know, I don't know, as prescient as Adorno, as specific about Adorno in terms of his dialectics and his ability to take into account the experimentals and the arts and, you know, the high modernist moment. But at the same time, how does Heidegger is really asking this radical, much more radical question of rootedness? How did this destiny of the West get to this point? You know, how did we actually get here? You know, and you know, someone used to say, you know, in order to go somewhere, it's usually good to know how you got there first, right? And you know, in some ways, he's right. Yeah, how do we really get here? You know, and so he's again asking this question. So you know, on one level, you're dealing with a history of epochal, you know, shifts, right? And a major epochal shift, and we're going to be talking about this today, the epoch of self-consciousness, vis-a-vis René Descartes, and we can certainly add Martin Luther to that, and how at the same time, you know, are we going to make the transition to something, you know, much more open for ourselves, right? Whereas there's a real new openness towards the future. How does this
Open
work?
or habitable? Which one?
Well, I don't think he's going to use the word habitable. He's going to talk about the open because that's where the revealing takes place, is in the open, in the opiate. The aletheia and the aletheological is an interpretive strategy of veiling and unveiling is happening in the opening. And I've used the word happening too. It's occurrence, you know, in the emergence that's all going on. Right? Yeah. So again, this is a question of, you know, and you know, to talk about principles, and I think I've, you know, somewhat done this before, but you know, arche, right, in the Greek, literally means to command, to begin, and it also means principle. So you want to talk about principle in philosophy, it's always a beginning of a commandeering moment, right? As well as a beginning, right? So anarchy, which comes from this word, is to be without principle, without commandment. Yeah. In some ways, without beginning. In some ways. Yeah. So, I mean, you could talk about this in a way, and this is another kind of politics. And one of my teachers, Reiner Sherman, wrote a book on the principles of anarchy as a politics. Which is an interesting, attempt to use Heidegger politically. So anyway, the commanding, the beginning, and the principle. All this is working in this arche, yeah, in the beginning. Okay. Obedience, the principle, and as a beginning. So in some ways what we're doing, and in some ways, and this is again, I don't think Heidegger and Adorno sort of ended up in the same place, maybe by different means, but in some, maybe not totally in the same place, but Heidegger realized that the search for beginning, too, wasn't really, the way to go. I think he knew this later on. And as you remember with Adorno today, we were discussing a little bit the notion of, there is no beginning. There is no principle in dialectics. You don't begin with principles in dialectic. You're always looking at movement. Okay? So we got a lot of work to do. I mean, again, this is a dense text, but a dense section. And this is really going to be about the Cartesian moment. So I just want to mention one thing. I want to read something that's very important, I think, on page 83 of the text. And this is on the notion of the letting be versus the what for. And I don't know if you read this carefully, but this is very important for understanding Heidegger's notion of freedom, ultimately. Ontically, to let something be relevant means to let things at hand be in such and such a way, in factical, taking care of things, to let them be as they are, and in order that they may be such. We grasp the ontic meaning of this letting be in a fundamentally ontological way. Thus we interpret the meaning of the previous freeing of inner-worldly beings initially at hand. Previously letting, this is page 85, section 18 on relevance. Previously letting be does not mean first to bring something to its being, but rather to discover something that is already a being in its handiness, and thus let it be encountered as the being of this being. Before something is objectified, before science, we were talking about that earlier today. This is, again, an attack on scientific method. This a priori, letting something be relevant, is the condition of the possibility that things at hand be encountered so that Dasein and its ontic dealings with the beings thus encountered can let them be relevant in the ontic sense. On the other hand, letting something be relevant, understood in the ontological sense, concerns the freeing of everything at hand as a thing at hand, whether it is relevant in the ontic sense or whether it is such a being which is precisely not relevant ontically. Such a being is one that initially and for the most part is taken care of, but which we do not let be as the discovered being it is. Since we work on it, we improve it, and we destroy it. To have always, already, and he uses this phrase like Derrida, before 27. Derrida's still, he's 3 more years he's born.
A lot of the postmodernists use that always, already.
Yes, right. Let something be freed for relevance is an a priori perfect, right? Characterizing the kind of being of Dasein itself. Understood ontologically, letting something be relevant is the previous freeing of beings for their inner worldly handiness. The with what of relevance is freed in terms of the together with what of relevance. It is encountered by heedfulness as this thing at hand. You know, we take so much for granted, we don't look at quote unquote the ready to hand carefully. We don't understand its taken care of, and we don't understand its inner worldliness, handiness. Okay, when a being shows itself in general to heedfulness, that is, when a being is discovered in its being, it is already a thing at hand in the surrounding world, and precisely not initially merely present world stuff, not present matter stuff to be used and to be dominated and to be over. Yeah, you want to say something, Chris?
I was just thinking
Yeah.
there's, I don't know how you knew that because I didn't move, but yes, I was thinking somebody wrote an article called "The Concept of Heed." Have you ever heard of that?
I know the. Yeah, I don't remember who wrote it, but I know.
It was the concept of consciously heeding.
Heeding, yes.
Yeah.
You see where a lot of these pop things like mindfulness and all this comes out of this as well. You know, heedfulness, you know, etc. Although he's trying to build this into, you know, a triad, if you will, again, of world, care, and self. That's why I'm emphasizing this again. And that freedom is this letting be discovered, letting the thing itself be discovered, right? Letting itself be discovered. Or uncovered would even be better, you know, in some ways. You know, uncovered. How has it been covered up in its use, right? I mean, all these instruments on the table. You know, what's in the cover-up. Right? Just, you know. He doesn't like electronics especially. He didn't own a phone.
I'm with him.
He didn't have a telephone. And forget TV.
Didn't have electricity.
Probably didn't have
When you say
electricity
cover up,
at the hut. No, I'm sorry. You gotta kind of admire it. I mean, in some ways.
No
I
solar.
mean, it's kind of like a curiosity.
You just
item.
sat there and
Yeah,
wrote.
he just wrote. Yeah, thought. Thoughts.
When you say cover up, you're talking about that principle when some worlds are revealed, others are concealed, others are always concealed.
Well, it's not a principle. This is always a movement in the Heideggerian enterprise. Aletheological is the interpretive model. That with hermeneutical ontology, right? These are the two moments that are going on. The aletheological is basically this moment in which things are being moved away from the lethe, from the structural lethe, right? This is what's happening. The structure itself, you're moving away, the alpha privative, so you can uncover it, right? Right? Yeah. So you're uncovering constantly, right? This is why he's going through so many structures, because there's destructuration taking place, right? Constantly, yeah. Not only in opposition, but constantly this kind of, I mean, I think the best term to do, for the way the English language works, is delayering. You're delayering. And I've used the term unlearning last week as well. Yeah? So you're unlearning all these things. The first and foremost thing that you're unlearning is taking things for granted. Yeah, that's the first thing you're unlearning. If you want to do philosophy, if you want to do any kind of thinking, you know, in that moment, you have to say, I mean, you know, I throw everything into question. I take nothing for granted. You know, and from there you begin, always. Yeah.
Is that sort of the same as saying starting with the everydayness of?
Well, the everydayness, again, is to let that be so it can be, quote unquote, discovered, right, in that way, yeah. But everydayness begins with Dasein. We're crucial as Dasein for this project because it's through us that this is happening.
Because we're the only beings
Yeah.
who can ask the question, what is the meaning?
Exactly.
of
The
my-
dog
my-
will not.
my-
The
my
dog. The
being?
dog just barks. Yeah, you'll see the dog. Yeah, the dog bark. You know, and you know, in Althusser's credit, you know, in the Hegelian idealism and the patient of the concept dog does not bark. He always used this as an example of.
Just is.
Yes. So anyway, and that's another thing. What Phil just mentioned. I'm sorry, I forgot pre-associated, but anyway, the predicate, the is. We're always looking at what's predicated here. This is always the task. We're not trying just to understand terms. We're looking really, what is the predicate here? And then the task we want to look at is he solving the realist, idealist problematic. Do we come to things through our mind, right? Or are we reflecting from the outside, which is vulgar dialectics, reflection theory, that we reflect on the things outside and the matter. And this is full in the Soviet textbooks all throughout.
Theory of reflection.
Theory of reflection, right? Or do we have the idea in our head already at the table? Do we come to words through the things, or do we have the words here? These are strategies, right? And then the materialist, approach in terms of the matter that is, basically the universe, that what things are made. Is this something? What is the motion? How does it move? Right? How does consciousness work with this? And then, of course, as we've been learning, in the introduction to dialectics, without social relations, there is no dialectic. And what Adorno's trying to, Stanley didn't really go there today, but according to Stanley's reading, I think he's right at some levels, there is an attempt at resolution of the natural, the dialectics of nature with the dialectics of the social. That somehow in nature itself, there's dialectical movement, right? And you see this at work. The interconnection of all things as Engels begins the dialectics of nature. So Heidegger's going to back up one step. Yeah, go please.
Adorno sort of doesn't go there much, at least in the lectures.
He doesn't go very much in the lectures, although it's kind of underneath the surface. Yeah. So, but Heidegger's going to take another step back, right? Because he's interested in what is this a priori experience of being? Can we ever get close to this again, right? In a sense. And you can say being as energy, being as, whatever. I mean, I've talked about this. I mean, my reading at one very elementary sense of ontology is you have being as value, Marx, you have being as desire, Freud, and you have being as power, Nietzsche. These are the three ontological, if you will, moments in modernity.
And being is time.
And being, of course, is time. Right. Yeah. The ontology, yes, right, exactly.
It has an end.
Doesn't have an end.
Being.
We don't know. We don't know if it has an end.
And
I have to read the rest of the
infinitus,
book.
What's that? There's a horizon that has an end. There's a horizon, but yes.
I mean,
It's interesting.
Yeah, go ahead.
Heidegger seems to leave open the question whether, because he doesn't use the word people or humans when he describes Dasein, right? At least, so he kind of leaves the question open whether other beings can also have Dasein. And that's kind of interesting.
No, the animal has no worldness.
but not just animals.
But not just
let's
animals.
say technology. Or,
Yeah, technology, no.
Yeah.
or something beyond. all
Worldless.
Yeah.
He'll go through this. He's been criticized for this too.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Technology can't have this. I mean, the technologists think that it can be.
Well, that may be part of the problem that, technology has its own existence, outside of Dasein. I mean, for Heidegger, that would be obviously a problem, I think, Yeah.
Hmm.
This is what technique does, technics versus that of techne. I mean, this is very active philosophy. You have to remember, this is very active. It's always moving, and we're always looking for a kind of fixed point. We're not going to get that, right? I mean, we're going to get structures. We're going to get descriptive pattern. The phenomenological method is at work here, in many ways. And right now he's trying to say, in the beginning is world, right? I mean, this is really it. This is. But to have world, you must have Dasein. There's no world without Dasein. Yeah, he speaks about this. And I mean, let me see if I can find that page. Again, because this is a very dense section. I mean, we could, again, spend multiple weeks on it. We'll see what we can do. I mean, again, as you know, I mentioned again, you know, the heedful dealings. This is on the beginning of the section 16, which is section 16 is about the surrounding world. Page 73. Yep. Heedfulness also comes up against things which are not there, not only handy but not at hand. Right? The missing, it's absence. So you begin to get this play between absence and presence in Heidegger as well, vis-a-vis heedfulness. And then you begin to see the language taking place in this section too. Referential systems.
What did they use for heedfulness in that book?
Implements they used? He used implements?
I don't know. I'm asking.
Oh. And which that's the Macquarie
Make
Robinson?
sure I have the right section. 16. Check it out. I think I have it.
Can be shown as heedful.
It's right there. I think I have it.
It's right above 74, Josh. 73, section 16.
Yeah, I see 16. Yeah.
But such heedful dealings.
Concernful.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about that. Yeah.
Concernful.
Heedful's much more dramatic.
Yeah. But it changes it, you know? Sort of.
Yeah.
Concernful.
Okay, I'm not going to go over the signs just because, you know, we can go back to that later, to his semiotics. But if you look at page 81, again, this is the end of 17. The foregoing interpretations of sign should simply offer phenomenal support for our characterization of reference, right? The relation between science and reference is threefold. As a possible concretus for the what-for of servability. So we're beginning to look at what a referential system is for Heidegger, vis-a-vis the Vorhanden. Indicating it is based upon the structure of useful things in general, upon the in order to reference. Right? So indicative signs are used as referential. As the character of useful things at hand, the indicating of signs belongs to a totality of useful things, that is, to a referential context. And signs, 3, are not just at hand along with other useful things. Rather, in their handiness, the surrounding world becomes explicitly accessible to circumspection, you know, to go over to this looking around. A sign is something ontically, which is at hand, ontically to us, right, as this definite, useful thing, the hammer, the broken hammer, right? You'll use that example. Functions at the same time as something which indicates the ontological structure of handiness, referential totality, and worldliness. The distinctive characteristics of these things at hand within the surrounding world, circumspectly taken care of, is rooted here. The circumspection, right, of the looking around is happening there. Thus, reference cannot itself be comprehended as a sign if it is ontologically, to be the foundation for signs. Reference is not the ontic specification of something at hand, since it, after all, constitutes handiness itself. In what sense is reference the ontological presupposition of what is at hand, and is this ontological foundation, to what extent is it at the same time constitutive of worldliness in general? So he's going to go about what is relevance and significance in the next section, meaning and relevance in the worldliness of the world, right? And this is where the letting be came in, you know, the letting be happen. To go just a little bit further, understanding, page 85, this is section 87. which will be analyzed with proper penetration in what follows, and look at section 31, holds the indicated relations in a preliminary disclosure. In its familiar being and relevance, understanding holds itself before that disclosure as that within which its reference moves. We shall call the relational character of these relational relations signifying. In its familiarity with these relations, Dasein signifies to itself. It primordially gives itself to understand its being and its potentiality of being with regard to its being in the world, the forsake of which signifies an in order to, the in order to signifies a what for, the what for signifies a what in, letting something be relevant, and the latter a what with of relevance. Okay?
That's an overwhelming sentence.
Yes,
It's almost like
right. Dasein shall give itself to understand its being in the world beforehand. We shall call this relational totality of signification significance. This is where meaning is starting. Okay? Yeah, go ahead, Arto. I'm sorry.
no, I mean,
yeah, I'm reading this because these are important passages. This is on what understanding is and what does it mean to be in a world. Yeah?
it's almost like he's verbalizing that which is.
The
It's like-
forsake of which signifies an in order to function, right? Right? Something has the forsake of, right? The ready to handness, the function of, the in order to, its goal, right? A what for significant, a what in and letting something be relevant. What in the world does this, mean, right? Right? And the latter, a what with of relevance. So you have the relational quality as well. The functional, the relational, all of this, and meaning is all tied up in this. So there's no such thing as dictionary meaning or just definition, right? I mean, this is what you want to probably take out of this. Vis-a-vis Adorno's attack, again, I'm trying to, work through sides of the fence here, so to speak. That Adorno is going to, go against dialectics is not about a search for definitions. This is the worst part of, when people are doing, quote, philosophy or whatever. So we call this relational totality of signification significance. It is what constitutes the structure of the world, of that in which Dasein as such already is. In its familiarity with significance, Dasein is the ontic condition of the possibility of the discovery of beings with a kind of being of relevance, handiness, which are encountered in a world and thus can make themselves known in itself. As such, Dasein always means that a context of things at hand is already essentially discovered with its being. In that it is, Dasein has always referenced itself to an encounter with a world. This dependency upon being referred belongs essentially to its being. But the significance itself with which Dasein is already familiar contains the ontological condition of the possibility that Dasein, and this is Dasein as interpretation, right, as understanding and interpreting. Dasein has these, as understanding, one, right, keep this in mind, and interpreting can disclose something akin to significations, which in turn found the possible beings of words and language. You're really looking here at the origin of language here in a certain way, the originated structure of language. As the existential constitution of Dasein and of its being in the world, the disclosed significance is the ontic condition of the possibility for discovering the totality of relevance. So if we thus define the being of what is at hand, relevance, and even worldliness itself as a referential context, are we not volatilizing the substantial being of inner worldly beings into a system of relations? And since relations are always something thought, are we not dissolving the being of inner worldly beings into pure thought? Within the present field of investigation, the repeatedly designated differences of the structures and the dimensions of the ontological problematic are to be fundamentally distinguished. This is important again. The being of the inner worldly beings initially encountered, handiness. 2. The being of beings, objective presence that is found and determined by discovering them in our own right in going through beings initially encountered. And 3. The being of the ontic condition of the possibility of discovering inner worldly beings in general, the worldliness of the world. And this is the really important part that requires both understanding and interpreting. Right? The third kind of being is an existential determination of the being in the world, that is, of Dasein. The other two concepts are categories and concern beings unlike Dasein. Right? Things in the world, right? And the ready-to-handness. You got this? 1 and 2 are the ready-to-handness, right? Encountered in the world, the handiness, right? The second one is the structure of vorhanden, the objectively present things, science, right? And then thirdly, if you will, or the way scientific movement happens, the being of the ontic condition of the possibility of discovering inner worldly beings in general, the worldliness of the world, right? And this is where, you're going to get the referential context that, can be formally understood in a system of relations, right? The relations and relata of the in order to, functioning for the sake of, with what, etc., resist any kind of mathematical functionalization, bottom of the page, in accordance with their phenomenal content. Nor are they something thought, something first posited in thinking, but rather relations in which heedful circumspection as such already dwells. As constituent of worldly, this system of relations does not volatilize the being of inner worldly beings at all. On the contrary, these beings are discoverable in their substantial in itself only on the basis of the presupposition, if you will, of the worldliness of the world. Right? The Welt, the Umwelt, yeah. Right? And only when they can be encountered at all does the possibility exist of making what is merely objectively present and acceptable in the field of these beings. He's looking at the possibility for the conditions of modern science right here. If you want to really try to think this through, this is where we should have gone today when Stanley began with the science, in the Adorno. On the basis of their merely objective presence, these beings can be determined mathematically in functional concepts with regard to their properties. Functional concepts of this kind are ontologically possible only in relation to beings whose being has the character of pure substantiality. Functional concepts are always possible only as formalized substantial context. In order to delineate the specific ontological problematic of worldliness more clearly, the interpretation of worldliness is to be clarified in terms of an extreme counterexample before proceeding with our analysis. So he's going to go back now to Descartes. I don't know if you read this, but this is going to be the analysis of worldliness and Descartes' interpretation of the world. Or what Heidegger later calls the age of the worldview, which it begins, and the age of world picture thinking, which is Descartes for him. Right? And we'll talk about that too. But you kind of see what he's doing here. Again, this presupposition of the worldliness of the world, being in the world, and now he's taking on, really, where is the beginning of this scientific project that's gotten into a mess? It's really at the level of the Vorhanden and the objective world and the objectively present world. And he really, in a sense, this is an analysis of reification, in many ways. Now, Alain Badiou, we'll talk about mathematical ontology here, just to, throw us off a little bit, but not really, but just to give you an idea of some of the debates that are going on. Badiou really thinks that ontology is first and foremost mathematical.
But he kind of gets to the same point that Heidegger does in the end, right? There's always a remainder.
Yes, always a remainder.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but you kind of see this in this section. It is kind of setting up the long, sections B, where, we were essentially trying to start today, and the whole thing of the Cartesian moment, all the way up to the spatiality of design and space, right at the end, is really being presupposed here with this notion of world and worldliness, right? And now sign, relevant, reference, etc. So the key terms here, once again, understanding and interpreting. Understanding and interpreting. How do you get to this? When people say, I hear you, they don't understand you at all, nor are they interpreting you. This is a cliche to Heidegger. In many ways. Just everyday speech. I don't hear you. Yeah. You feel me? That's the other one, right? I hear you enough, you feel me. Yeah. Right? Okay.
That must be a Canadian.
What's that?
Do you feel me? And do you hear me is one thing. I'm not familiar with the...
No, feel me. You feel me?
It's like that.
You haven't heard
That's
that?
like the street.
No, feel me.
Yeah.
You feel me, man.
Yeah, yeah, I heard that.
Never heard of
Spend more
Yeah.
time on the street.
Yeah.
You gotta be on the street, man.
I guess so.
I'm half the time. My everydayness is on the street.
I feel
Yeah. You gotta feel it, man. You feel me? You haven't heard you feel me?
it. I have not.
Or I feel you? No, you never heard that?
I feel for you, but
No, you never heard I feel you?
I
Yeah.
feel for you.
And how about no doubt?
oh, of
You
course.
heard that?
Don't doubt.
Okay, that's easy.
That's easy. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
easy.
but you haven't heard I feel you?
I feel your pain.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, that's archaic. No, it's just I feel
Don't
you.
worry about it.
I feel you.
So they just shortened it to its essence, and
Yeah, yeah.
not I feel your pain anymore.
I'm gonna say I attune you. I heed you.
They'll accuse you of not creating a
Yeah,
safe space.
I heed you. Yeah, that's right. I got that again too.
Turn on.
Turned off the. I cannot go on.
Yeah.
I said I thought you were radical.
I must go
But
on. I cannot go
Yes,
on.
indeed. I must go on. No accidents. M. Malloy is M, huh? Yeah. Anyway,
So this
you
mathematical
kind of see it. Yeah, go ahead.
fixing-
But
it's
you
a
see the.
fixing is,
Yeah.
is really what he's against. Really, it's this idea.
Well, it's against the mathematization of the world, right?
Yeah.
Against
Because it
his formula,
fixes
and he's
things.
trying to see, it's not only against, he's doing a very good job of, basically giving us an understanding and interpreting of this. This is the important part to keep in mind, that he's really, in a sense, looking at the scientific project.
Yeah.
And what is the scientific project based on? And poets began to go mad. The mathematization of the universe, right? The Galileanization of the universe, right? Etc. So he's really looking at this as how the formalization and the quantification
Yeah.
and calculated rationality, right? And which is a term he'll use too. That's a code word for it. He's not thinking, I better not use capitalism. He doesn't think this way.
Right.
He's thinking in terms of concepts.
Right.
Calculated rationality is what capitalism is.
Okay.
What the rationality of the irrationality of that rationality is another story. But it's the calculation that's always there. So we now live no longer in the capitalist mode of production. Everything we talk about is the capitalist mode of prediction.
Right.
This is our epoch. If you want to talk about this in terms of Marxist talk, what we're reacting to out there today, if you really think about it, it's really the capitalist mode of prediction. Everything is being predicted. What's the tax bill going to look like? What are the markets going to do? What is this going to do? Et cetera. Everything is on actuarial basis, probability theory. What's that? Bitcoin.
What are the markets?
Yeah,
Go
Bitcoin.
to
What's
Bitcoin.
Bitcoin going to do?
Yeah.
So anyway,
It's expensive.
I mean, so in a sense, he's
How long is your blockchain?
yeah, that's the best one. That's the best one.
What?
Man, you got a long blockchain there. Yeah. I can hear it coming now. I got to spend a little more time on the streets. I have the vernacular around blockchain. Yeah. But you think about block and chain, right? Yeah. You think about the mentality and what's going on in this language. What is the linguistic expression? What is this really, giving us in a certain way? Yeah.
And can the AI have design?
I mean, maybe we should start the Lenin. Lenin says, break the link, the weakest link in the chain, in the blockchain. Right? What were you going to say, Arto? Or,
No, I mean, so the mathematization, of course, is the problem because it.
Well, it's part of the problem. But the problem is it's substantial. Remember when I did these things about substance and, et cetera, and categories? So again, this entitatively, factual, all of this is where that formalization is taking place.
And
And where the signification is.
Yeah.
This is the difference here. See, this is why it becomes the terms of the inquiry become categorical, right? As well as, and this is Kant in some ways, who, had a background in mathematics, no question about it. Some good books on that, by the way. But anyway, going back to this, the category is this accusative case, and then the substantive, moments that come out of this is taking place in this energetic level, on the ontic level all the time, which again is avoiding and evading and forgetting the question of being. Right?
In the language
Right.
of meaning from previous pages.
Yes.
So what happens is we lose access to this relational totality.
We lose
We don't
access.
think
That's
that
right.
way.
We don't think.
That's why he says we don't like.
Yeah,
if you
absolutely.
don't think,
Good.
science doesn't think because
Science doesn't
it's
think.
not relational enough. Or if it is, it's relational partially.
Science-
Like within mathematics, there's relations.
Science
But
again.
math
Yeah.
does not connect the relationality of its own facts to the broader totality of
Right.
the world.
The beginning is here, the Vorhanden, the present to hand. What is the data in front of us? It's like Stanley keeps referring to someone died of cancer today. Remember we heard, this today about, causality and all of this. Well, this is your homo datum right here, in a certain way, as a new kind of objective presence of things at hand, right? This becomes objects as things, a kind of new reification. I mean, it's not that different than Lukács, and in some ways riffs off of Lukács. From reification and class consciousness of the proletariat. I'm not, denying that at all. But so this becomes present to hand and objectively present, right? Objectively present means it's thrown out there. We're thrown against it, in a certain way. It's still within this realm of us having categories for us and not understanding its presuppositions or what's behind it. Or to go back to this term of aletheia, we don't understand its discoveredness, what it's covering up in a way. All right? So, this makes some, I don't want to say make sense because it's not supposed to just make sense. Yeah. So yes. So calculated rationality forgets this, right? The ready to hand, right? And handiness. And usefulness, right? And what it really forgets is worldness behind it, right? And being in a world, right? Which we are, our design, etc., right? And it turns thy design into objectivated entities, right? Who are able to become categorized, schematized, right? Factualized, etc., right?
It's a crippling.
Of course it's a crippling, yeah.
And
Yeah.
why do it? It's so stupid. I mean, that's
Because
what he's
it's
saying.
profit.
That's what he's saying.
Profit.
It's so
That's right,
stupid
right.
to do this. It's
Right.
like you're crippling your
Yes.
That's
right.
the being
Well,
of your own
the
being.
inner worldliness is not really spoken about anymore.
Yeah.
And as you said, the relational aspects of all of this, the totality, is being completely missed in a way. It becomes, when you say science does not think, science only does. It does, on its project, right? And it's, yeah.
So in this quantification of everything, more or less,
Right.
is what remains unquantifiable, like intuition or
No,
the unconscious?
that's not, he's not
even-
talking about those kind of things.
He's
at all.
not going.
No.
Intuition is not permitted, right? I mean, they would say that, like,
Isn't
Well,
that
you
what
do-
he's?
you know, at school, it
The intuitive grasp of things, and this was
But
part of
isn't
the-
that what we've lost? Is the intuitive
Well, we have
element?
lost that in some ways, but again, for him, it's the ansham, the thing in themselves we've lost. The matters themselves, the dasaka, the matters themselves. The battle cry, once again, was back to the things themselves, because we have covered up the things themselves by these formal quantification, this mathematization, etc. In a system of calculated rationality that begins with, in Heidegger's history of being, with the epoch of self-consciousness. Since at the bottom, and we're going to go into Descartes a little bit, the universalis mathesis is at the bottom. Universal mathematics is at the bottom. Mathesis also means to learn, though. This is interesting. You have to stay with these ambiguities, because mathesis in Greek means also to learn. The root of the word mathematics. And remember, in Plato's Republic, the two basic categories, history of philosophy for the educational apparatus, are basically musicos, which has mathematics next to it, and the physical training. These are the two moments that are the basis of all learning. Right? The musical.
Music and math.
Music and
healthy
well,
mind
no,
requires a
that's
healthy body.
yeah, something that was the Latins. Yeah.
Yeah.
They got it.
That's the
body.
imperial.
The Greeks had a different notion
That's
of
the
the
imperial.
body. Right. But anyway, yeah, Caligula. So anyway, yeah. So you have this kind of moment that's going on early on. Music, not mathematics. Music, because in music, there's mathematics.
Music contains
Yes, contains. Well, yeah,
But
music
it's
is a
not
higher
only
form.
math. But
It's a higher form. Nobody said it was only math. But he said,
And he's not saying
mathematics.
it's only math either. It's just one
No, of
part.
course not. No. He's looking at this. Look, he's looking at this.
The whole thing.
The ontic. Yes, these are ontic determinations,
Yeah.
right? So yeah. And what does science use? He's looking at this again, because he's going to go in later, as we're going to see in the later sections, into temporality. Right? It's going to go into time, the horizon of time. So in the horizon of time, can time be quantified? Yeah? What are we really going to do here? Ultimately, in terms of thinking this, is space, he's going to talk about spatial relation in this section, because you have world and space, right? You have Ram, you have Zeitraum, you have time-space as well. All these kind of things. Listen, if you can think relationally, this is going to be much more rewarding, I think. I mean, part of the problems with Heidegger is that everybody tries to open the system, I don't understand. But if you start trying to think these things relationally, that's why I did, again, the triadic, not in terms of a dialectical triad, but as, a conceptual triad, if you will. Care, self, and world. You're always thinking through these moments, right? These three throughout this. In the Vorhanden, right? In the Zoomhanden, you're thinking about this in attunement. You're always being in. In is crucial. When you want to think Heidegger, you're always thinking in a world. In a world. Being in is crucial.
You said that a couple of days ago, weeks ago, being as time.
Yeah, the role. Yeah. Being
That's
as
sort of
time.
more appropriate.
It's as time. Yeah.
So the relation.
Ontology is time. Yeah.
But that's almost the same argument that
You
the
could have
different way that
redone
Adorno
it.
says about dialectics. Dialectics is relational because the contradiction comes straight from the proposition. There's no externalities, right? If you in proper dialectical thought, it's purely
Informal
relational.
dialectical.
It's purely
The
relational.
dialectical.
There's just shifts. There's just
Yeah.
shifts of perspective, of results, of processes. It's never non-relational.
That's true.
And Heidegger is saying that
Yes. the same
Dasein
thing.
is we exist relationally. purely.
Yes, absolutely. We're being in first and foremost. We're in a world, secondly, right? Always already. World is being presupposed here, right? Yeah. And then we're being with, right? Which he does not flesh out. The mid-sign, which I mentioned to you that someone like Jean-Paul Sartre comes around and starts talking about the real concrete relations with others, the being with. And this is why they said he didn't have an ethics. Heidegger, because he had no with world fleshed out. Right? He was criticized on other levels, obviously. Yeah. The good thing about philosophy, don't just criticize it. Go with the whole thing and see what's wrong first. And you can very easy to criticize. Without reading it all. So it's the end. I'm emphasizing something very basic here. It's not a question of just I'm trying to repeat myself. It's this: in the world, right? In the world being. In being in the world being. You start thinking of things like this as prepositional movements, prepositional movements, if you will. So when you talk about positions are posits, right? This is why Derrida never says, when they say, what is your position on this? So I don't have a position, I have positions. Right? In a way. He's making fun in some ways, but at the same time he's talking about the notion of posit that's in position.
Proposition.
Yeah, of course. For that posit. Yes. That's what a proposition is. Yeah. I'm gonna go give Harvey Weinstein lessons in jail. I'm gonna make a fortune. Yeah, anyway. He didn't know how to do the proposition. I'm just kidding.
Well, he did the revealing.
They all did the revealing, unfortunately. These guys have problems. No question about that.
It's almost like they never passed a certain.
They never passed a certain age. Yeah.
Primordial.
Oh yeah, that was the best one.
Which one?
The Harrison Keeler.
What happened?
They got him too.
Yeah.
He was up there.
Keeler.
Prairie Home Companion. Terrible.
Yeah.
NPR.
Poor-
NPR?
Yeah.
Oh, the Prairie Home Companion.
The whole
is,
thing.
I had heard that
Decades
before,
old,
that
was
he
it?
was
Oh
chasing
yeah, I know that bit. Yeah. So what was he
Police
doing?
around the room.
But these are just
He
pure
was,
witch hunts.
uh,
and stuff.
Yeah, this
Is
is
there?
doing what they all
does-
do, more or
it
less.
does.
There's no
Smack.
evidence. It's just hearsay. Like somebody says something.
No.
It
So often-
smacks of a witch hunt, reverse gender.
Well,
But I think-
and I'm not
I think
an
often they have
arch-feminist.
more things, they'll go by one thing, but they also say, several other people have come forward and they have more, for whatever, but,
Anyway,
Yeah.
think about this, because remember, he does talk about the origin of positivism if we go back to the ground problems of phenomenology. The first reading, the basic problems of phenomenology, he has a whole section, Heidegger, on the posit and its relationship,
Yeah.
the fundamental. No, in the handout I gave, remember where we started? The fundamental problems of
Right.
phenomenology? Yes, there's a whole section on positing there. And that's what science does too. That's why, again, he says science does not think. Propositional logic. What he's basically doing, he's dismantling the entire, I like this stuff. I mean, it basically is clearing, it's a clearing the ground. How do we really think? How have we become accustomed to think? So, to me, this is why, in some ways, listen, Adorno's radical, it's got all that radicality. And this guy's leveling the entire history.
He's making possible the next wave of radical thinking, essentially.
Or clearing the ground
Yeah.
for a kind of new tasks for thinking going forward. Right?
He has an essay called What is Called Thinking.
It's a great piece. We have not yet sung. We have not begun to think.
It's right from the beginning.
Right in the beginning.
Yeah.
What is called thinking. We have not yet begun to think. I mean, he's got a great flair for the,
It's interesting. Heidegger seems like a philosopher that it's easy to criticize if you don't read.
Yes.
But if the more you read, it becomes almost impossible.
Very serious to take. You have to take
It's
it
almost
seriously.
impossible to critique.
These kind of people that say don't read him. I mean, there are. This makes no sense to me at this point. And he's too important to me to be giving up just because of he writes a couple of things in a notebook
The
or
black book.
he happens to go into this. I think in a way he went half mad. If you read the contributions to philosophy, 1935, you can begin to see the madness coming in, because he's really tortured about what's happening to the German language, what's happening to the philosophical language, and he's trying to confront the regime by certain kind of codes. So it's something very interesting. I mean, we won't read it this semester, but yeah, he was terrified. Yeah, and it's terrifying what he did too. I mean, you know, both. I mean, you know, but he's thinking that in this context. And the amazing thing is, in the United States, we're witnessing now this kind of, you know, the worst forms of friendly fascism, if you want to call it that, whatever you want to call it, you know, or yeah. And we're not thinking at all. We're not thinking this at all. We have no concepts to deal with. It's the same old story. They're corrupt. They're, you know, bad actors. They're, you know, this. They're misogynist. They're sexist. They're that
It's
and that.
complete
and that.
babble.
We have
It's
this
pure
sort of
babble.
sense of a very simple identity politics, but we're not thinking it relationally at all. Why is this going on? You know, what is really
Russians.
happening here? It's the right, always the Russians are coming. I wish they would show
Putin
up.
quoted,
They did.
it's all over the,
They came, they already got here, huh?
3 of the 4 soloists
Okay,
today in
you
the
know, in the
Requiem
Russian
were
media,
are Russian
some
citizens.
Russian senator, she proposed they
Except for
remove the
Forlanetzi.
family code, which is the Soviet family code, which doesn't equate family life with like the church. She says we need to do that because the Bolsheviks destroyed family life. They were all about
They all-
like, free love. Putin quoted Engels from memory. He said it's not true that monogamy is a virtue.
He recorded Bengals today?
Yeah.
This is today?
Last week.
Oh, good, good, good.
And
good.
people are like, what?
I like him
He's
more and
quoting
more.
Marx.
Who said that?
Putin.
I'm
He
gonna
said
get
it's
a
not a
horse,
virtue
yeah.
that monogamy, we cannot argue that monogamy is a virtue. He said you have to read, he said, you
Origin
have to
of
read
private
Marx and
property,
Engels.
the
Yeah, yeah.
family, and the state.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's right.
So,
I feel like this new moment that we're in that we don't have a way to talk about is this homo datum thing. Like this intensification of
Well,
what
that's,
Foucault
you know, that's
called
Stiegler,
anarcho-capitalism.
that's actually Stiegler's main point right
what is it now?
is that we live in a world that's dominated by data.
Like
Data.
And when
We
I
are
say-
our data.
When I say the new mode of production is really the mode of prediction, that's where we really are, you know, it's a new.
Which works of Stiegler? Which I guess all of them.
Well, the future of work is the latest one on the automated society, and he'll talk about that.
But before that, was it the
Technics and time. Technics and
Well,
time.
technics in time is the major ontology of Stiegler.
Di-
Stiegler's trying to reverse this. He's trying to look at this as outside of us, no Dasein necessary, that we come to it, you know, in a sense. You know, this is Stiegler's kind of argument in a way, that it's the fault of Epimetheus, it's no longer Prometheus that's stealing the knowledge from, you know, it's actually the faulty brother. It's, you know, it's the broken hammer in the beginning, not the hammer.
Oh, so he throws being out in a way.
In a way that, well, he's doing it on technics in time.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
it's technics, it's no longer being. Right, the
We come
Dasein
to
is
the
not,
techniques.
yeah.
We-
So he's gonna use category, he's gonna use language of individuation, which is very good, Simidon
Yeah.
and others, you know, and the relation to technical objects. You have to remember, this is obviously a very serious problem to modernity, you know. How do we allow the objects to dominate us? If you look around, the cell phone and people looking in this and the screen dominates 95% of everyday life. I mean, it's completely determined and it's a, you know, a series of determinate relations where there's no thinking outside of the screen. No thinking at all. There's no fracturing or breaking of the screen.
But how is it that the screen captivates our attention?
Because it's a world of, well, you're reading the question concerning technology.
Yeah.
We're framed up. We're gestalt.
That's the inframing.
Yeah, we're inframed. We're ensnared and we're inframed simultaneously.
Remember the
Heidegger wants us to think outside the frame. This is why her friend Daddy Da writes, I just played, you know. Her friend Daddy Da is basically, you know, looking at truth in painting by breaking frames, fracturing the frame. Yeah. And Adorno called his version of the dialectic the fractured dialectic, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah,
That's
which is
the
interesting. Right, interesting, the fractured dialectic. So you're beginning, you see these things happening today that are in some ways a response to this gestalt, the framework, right? The storing up, you know, you remember that the reserve stock,
The standing reserve.
the standing reserve, and reserve stock. Those are silos. He's horrified by this stuff. He knows nuclear silos. He knows, not I mean brain silos, but I mean, yeah. But that's part of reserve, So, yeah.
No, there was a commercial, I think for a tech company or something, which showed a bunch of people looking at Big Brother type screen, and somebody comes running down the aisle with a huge hammer and smashes the screen and liberates.
That was the Apple commercial
Was
that
it?
launched the Macintosh back in 1984.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, see, that's
the-
another antagonism we have.
Yeah,
We have Madison Avenue
Ultimate
that takes this
co-optation.
language,
And co-ops it.
commodifies it
Yeah.
quickly,
Yeah.
and then it becomes part of everyday pop
Very
culture,
quickly.
but it takes away from any of the thought that's going on in it.
Mhm.
This is it. Yeah. Yeah.
It's happening very quickly now, the way they co-opt.
Completely inaccessible.
Well, I mean, the thing about why this thought, and going back to the concept of dissonance in both music and in thought, is that it can't be co-opted.
Yeah.
That's the reason that Adorno writes the way he does,
Right.
where you're going through a negation of the negation, you're going through the negative all the way to the extreme. The same thing in Heidegger, why you're getting these incredible, descriptive structures, right? Descriptions and phenomenological approach to this structures and the pre-understanding. We're just in the pre-understanding here.
Yeah.
We're not in the meat of the existential analytic yet. Yeah, no, which is very important. We haven't really met subjectivity. We're doing the preliminaries here in terms of the method, the academics, the methodology, the formal aspects, all these kind of things. But we're not really into yet the thing. I mean, look, again, to go back here for a second, the stepping back is always important. You're not only taking one step, you're taking a kind of two-step, right? You step back and then you trace, right? You're stepping back and then you're tracing back to the originative emergence, if you will. Always already. This is really what's going on. Yeah, exactly. And you can see the difference here again between you have world, right, the transcendental, the transcendent subject, right? In there you have the average everydayness, right? Its vagueness, and then you have the phenomenological, where it's going to look at the phenomena of Dasein from the thinking of every, right? How do you wrest something from a phenomenon? How do you really understand the phenomenon? So think of this again, you have understanding, no longer understanding and sensibility as in Kant, but you have force and understanding as in Hegel's phenomenology. This one's about understanding and interpreting. Okay, so you have a Verstandung, right? And also the interpretive, the hermeneutical happening. And now he's going to try to do this hermeneutic. You're going to see the understanding at work in practice with Descartes and the cogito. This is the next section coming up. So he's going to give, he's not really giving examples. He's basically demonstrating, if you will, what he means. Okay. Any questions or thoughts at this point? Or yeah. I mean, we could, like I said, read this book for a long time. And, yeah, he's right. You have to rest. Rest.
But the
I
amazing
love this
thing
word, the rest of the phenomena.
The lectures
Wrestle.
maintain this kind of intensity. It just never lets go. The lecture just continuously for 50 years.
Of course. We saw the photograph of him at 16.
What do you mean?
Yeah. And again, you know what he said about Nietzsche? You want to learn Nietzsche? Read Aristotle for 10 years. Then start reading Nietzsche. So you can imagine how our pedagogy, how much we could be doing instead. All right, let's go on to the contrast before our analysis of worldliness, because he's going to juxtapose this with Descartes, right? Our investigations can secure the concept of worldliness and the structures contained in this thought only step by step, right? Since the interpretation of the world initially starts with an inner worldly being and then never gains sight of the phenomena of world again, we shall attempt to clarify this point of departure ontologically in what is perhaps its most extreme development. Section B, page 87. Section B and 89 in the text, and this is in section, I think it's still section 18 if I'm not mistaken. Yes, section 18 on irrelevance. The contrast, right? Very, very important, this section. We shall not give only a short presentation of the fundamental features, but we also will ask about its presuppositions and try to characterize those presuppositions in the light of what we in this treatise have clarified up to now. This discussion shall tell us on what fundamentally undiscussed ontological foundations the interpretations of the world after Descartes, and especially those preceding him, are based. What are the foundations? And he puts that in quotation marks for a reason, foundations, because Descartes claims to have provided the foundations for modernity. Right? That he has actually done this. Okay? So, Descartes sees the fundamental ontological determination of the world as extensio, res extensens. You know, and I think I have it all the way over there as part of the Vorhanden too, right? As the objectively present world, that you can somewhat equate it with that, okay?
Extensio, but it's not that.
No.
Okay.
Yeah. Since extension is a component of spatiality, for Descartes, in fact, identical with it, and since spatiality is in some sense constitutive of the world, our discussion of the Cartesian ontology of the world at the same time offers a negative support for the positive explication of the spatiality of the surrounding world and of Dasein itself. Okay? With regard to Descartes' ontology, we should discuss three things. One, the determination of the world is res extensa. And you know what I like about Heidegger's approach? He's going to tell you, what are our guiding questions? What are we going to really be discussing? I like this pedagogy of this style. You know, this is a very good way of doing serious research and philosophy. The determination of the world as res extensa. Two, the foundations of this ontological determination. What is it founded upon? And remember, we went through foundational ontology versus fundamental ontology earlier, you know, in terms of the disciplines. And then, thirdly, we're going to have the interpretive, the hermeneutical discussion of the Cartesian ontology of the world. The following reflections can be grounded in more detailed only by the phenomenological destruction of the cogito sum. And remember, we went a little bit through that as well, the I think and the I am, and the question of thinking, right, and being thought together. Right? Instead, Descartes separates this out. He bifurcates it. Okay? All right. 19, section, first of all, the determination of the world as res extensa. Descartes, and you know, like it or not, we still live in a Cartesian universe. No question about it. If there's one philosopher to really be studied today, I mean, look, I know we're studying this is for our book, but to really get a crucial understanding of how medicine works, how the scientific project, it's René Descartes. You know, this is our, you know, advent of modernity. We're still stuck in these paradigms. We're still thinking mind-body dualism. We still think in dualistic categories. We have dualistic ontologies. Even Levi-Strauss and Sartre are still dualists in a way because of that Cartesian, heritage.
Yeah, I mean, so if you say classical, basically you're saying Descartes.
Yes, classical for the French means Descartes.
Yeah.
Yes, when you say classical philosophy in France, you're not talking about ancient philosophy.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, there are three basic pillars to philosophy. There's the ancient, there's the medieval, and then there's the modern. The modern is really René Descartes. These are the three pillars of the history of philosophy. The ancient, which begins pre-Socratic through Aristotle all the way up, if you will, until probably St. Augustine, in terms of Neoplatonism and its articulations. And then, of course, the medieval, it finds its culmination in Summa Theologica of St. Thomas Aquinas, and then the advent of the modern, which begins with Descartes and probably ends with Hegel. Hegel's the end point of that, right? And then you have the masters of suspicion, Nietzsche, and Marx especially, and then, of course, Freud, who's not really a philosopher, but you could think of him as a philosopher, that the psychoanalyst performs the next Copernican revolution in terms of thinking. We're not really don't have this ego that Descartes, this I think, is a very small part of our...
Not mastered.
Yeah, has no mastery.
In his own home, or something.
Right. So in a way, Freud is, really radical in that sense in terms of undoing the mastery, that the discourse of mastery. Right?
Yeah.
What?
I just went to this lecture on Freud, and there the presenter was discussing Freud's description of his trip to Rome. Apparently,
You mean with the Botticelli, the painting?
I'm not sure. He went to Rome a number of times, but what he liked was the going down the architecture of Rome,
Yes.
the different levels, which he compared to the levels of the mind.
Right.
But he gave ancient, medieval, and then Renaissance as the three levels.
Well, Renaissance is also modernity, but I think the Renaissance did not really produce a new foundational moment for philosophy. It rediscovered some of these people and maybe made possible, Descartes to emerge. But in some ways, it's Descartes who advents in modern philosophy. The cogito and the Luther's subject, in a way, are the advents of this, right? But let's take a look. Okay. So he distinguishes the ego cogito as res cogiton from the res corporea, right? The thinking thing from the thinking body, right? From then on, this distinction ontologically defines the distinction of nature and spirit. Although this opposition between nature and spirit is formulated ontically in many variations of content, the unclarity of its ontological fundamentals and even of the poles of this opposition itself have their proximate roots in Descartes' distinction. In what kind of understanding of being did he determine the being of these beings? The term for the being of beings in themselves is substantia. This expression sometimes means the being of beings as substance, substantiality, sometimes beings themselves, a particular substance. This ambiguity of substantia already inherent in the ancient concept of ousia is not accidental. The ontological, and when he says it's not accidental, he means it, right? The ontological determination of the corporal thing requires the explication of substance, that is, of the substantiality of these beings as particular substances. What constitutes the true being in itself of the res corporea? How is a substance as such, that is, its substantiality, to be understood? And then he has this long Latin thing that I have no idea how to translate that. I mean, I know where that is, but he's talking about, obviously, the essential constitutive moments and how do other things refer themselves to it. Substances are accessible only through their attributes, and every substance has an eminent property in terms of which the essence of the substantiality of a definite substance can be determined. What is the property with regard to the res corporea? And then he goes on again with a similar kind of thing. Extension in terms of length, breadth, and depth constitutes the real being of the corporeal substance what we call world. Okay? So extension, length, breadth, and depth. Okay? So we're starting to use terms, right? In mathematics and in spatial relations. What gives the extensia this distinction? Extension is the constitution of being of the beings under discussion. a constitution which already must already be before other determinations of being, in order for the latter to be what they are. Extension must be primarily attributed to the corporeal thing. Accordingly, the proof for the extension and the substantiality of the world, characterized by that extension, is accomplished by showing how all other properties of this substance, above all, division, figure, motion, can only be conceived as modes of extensia, and that extensio conversely remains intelligible without figure and without, motion, right? Thus, a corporeal being can maintain its total extension and yet change the distribution of the extension in many ways and in various dimensions, and still present itself as one and the same thing in manifold shapes. And then again, a long passage, and that one body retaining the same size may be extended in many different ways, sometimes being greater in length and less in breadth or depth, and sometimes on the contrary, greater in breadth and less in length. If motion is an existent property of the res corporea, then it must be understood in terms of the being of this being itself in terms of extensia. That is, his mere chance of change of location in order to be experienced in its being. Something like force adds nothing to the determination of the being of this being. Properties such as durities, hardness, pondus, weight, color can be removed from matter, yet matter remains what it is. These properties do not constitute its true being, and insofar as they are, they turn out to be modes of extension. Descartes attempts to show this in detail with regard to hardness. And again, he's going to go on about this. Hardness is experienced by touch. What does the sense of touch tell us about hardness? The part of the hard thing resists the motion of the hands, for instance, in wanting to push something away. But if the hard bodies, those who do not give way, change their location with the same speed as the hard approaching the bodies, nothing would ever be touched. Hardness would not be experienced and thus would never be. But it is in no way comprehensible that bodies that give way with such velocity should thus forfeit any of their corporeal being. If they were to retain this even under a change of velocity, which makes it impossible for anything like hardness to be, then hardness does not belong to the being of these beings either. Then he goes on again. The same reason shows us that weight, color, and all the other qualities of the kind that are perceived in corporeal nature may be taken from it, it remaining meanwhile entire. It thus follows that the nature of body depends on none of these. All right. Thus, what constitutes the being of the res corporea is extensia, the divisible entire world, the figurable and mobile, which can change in every kind of divisibility, shape, and motion. The capax mutationem, which would persist throughout all these changes, remain. In a corporeal being, what is capable of such a remaining constant is what is genuinely that being. Indeed, it is this in such a way that it characterizes the substantiality of the substance. So, the idea of being, which the ontological characteristics of the res extensa are derived as substantiality. And again, some Latin here. The being of a substance is characterized by not needing anything. Whatever in its being absolutely needs no other being satisfies the idea of substance in the true sense. This being is the perfected end. This is the nothing but God answers to this description as the being which is absolutely self-sustaining. Here, God is a purely ontological term when he is understood as the perfected end. At the same time, the self-evident connotation of the concept of God makes possible an ontological interpretation of the constitutive factor of substantiality, that of not needing anything. All beings other than God need to be produced in the broadest sense and to be sustained. The production of what is objectively present and the lack of need for production constitute the horizon within which being is understood. And you can see again that this Zoomhanden, this Vorhanden, the objectively present, in terms of the scientific project, which Heidegger will talk about later, is also operative here in Descartes, right? In many ways, right? Yeah. Even being other than God is the created end. The being which belongs to one of these entities is infinitely different from that which belongs to the other, yet we still consider what is created and the creator alike as beings. We thus use being in such a broad sense that its meaning encompasses an infinite distinction. Thus we can also call creative beings substances with a certain justification. It is true that these beings need to be produced and sustained relative to God, but within the region of creative beings of the world in the sense of the ens creatum, there are beings which are in need of no other being relative to creaturely production and sustenance. For example, human beings. There are two such substances, and those two such substances are the thinking thing and the extended thing. The being of that substance, whose eminent propriety is extensio, is thus definable in principle ontological when the meaning of being common to the three substances, the one infinite and the two finite ones, are clarified. So again, this is a long commentary on the beginning of modernity and how spatialization is working. How the res extensa actually operates and how the scientific project builds itself, right? Descartes touches a problem which occupied medieval ontology, namely the question in what way the meaning of being signifies the meaning of being under consideration. In statements such as God is, the world is, we predicate being. But this word is cannot signify the being in question in the same sense when, after all, there's an infinite distinction of being between the two beings. If the significance of the is were univocal, the creature would be understood as the uncreated, or else the uncreated would be degraded to being a creature. But being does not simply function in the same name. Rather, in both cases, being is understood. Scholasticism understands the positive sense of the significance of being as an analogous meaning in contradistinction to the univocal or merely homonymous one. Following Aristotle, in whom the problem is prefigured as it is in the point of departure of Greek ontology in general, various kinds of analogy were established, according to which the schools differed in the interpretation of the functional significance of being. With regard to the ontological development of the program, Descartes is far behind the scholastics. He actually evades the question. Right? And he goes, this evasion means that Descartes leaves the meaning of being contained in the idea of substantiality and the character of the universality of this meaning unexplained. Medieval ontology left the question of what being said means just as in question as did ancient ontology. Thus it is not surprising if a question such as that of the kinds of significations of being gets nowhere as long as it is to be discussed on the foundation of an unclarified meaning of being which the signification expresses. The meaning was unclarified because it was held to be self-evident. Descartes not only completely evades the ontological question of substantiality, he emphasizes explicitly that substance is such, that is, its substantiality is in and for itself inaccessible from the beginning. Right? Being itself does not affect us, therefore it cannot be perceived. Being is not a real predicate, according to Kant, who is only repeating Descartes' statement. And this is important too. Being is not a real predicate. Heidegger will do a whole section on this in a little piece. I'll see if I can get it for you. Kant's thesis about being, in which, he talks about, this whole thing of being not having a real predicate. Thus, the possibility of a pure problematic of being is renounced in principle, and in a way out is sought for arriving at the definitions of substances designated above. Because being is in fact not accessible as a being, it is expressed by existing definite qualities of the beings in question by attributes, not, however, by arbitrary qualities, but those that most purely satisfy the meaning of being and substantiality tacitly presupposed. Right? Anyway, the ontological foundations for the definition of world in res extensa become clear. They are found in the idea of substantiality, which is not only unexplained in the meaning of the being, but is also declared to be inexplicable, which is presented by way of a detour around the most distinctive substantial attribute of the substance in question. In the definition of substance in terms of substantial being, one also sees the reason why the term substance is ambiguous. What is intended is substantiality, and is understood in terms of an existent quality of substance. Because something ontic is made to underlie the ontological, the expression substantia functions sometimes in an ontological, sometimes in an ontic meaning, but mostly in a meaning which sifts about in the hazy mixture of the two. But behind this slight difference of meaning lies the hidden failure to master the fundamental problem of being. Its development requires tracking down the equivocations in the right way. Whoever tries this sort of thing is not occupied only with mere verbal meanings, but must venture forth to the most primordial problematic of the things themselves to get such nuances straightened out. Okay, so the next, section here is going to try to get back to the things themselves in this. You sort of understand that Descartes is really establishing this res extensa as a kind of false substantiality, according to Heidegger, and that he's really taking on this kind of dualism, first of all by showing that he's completely indebted to the being of the scholastics, does
Yeah,
not
what are
really
the
go
scholastics?
for it. The scholastics are the medievals. They're known as, this would be everybody from Duns Scotus
Okay.
to Aquinas, St. Thomas Aquinas.
I see.
But it would include a lot of
By
other people.
Aristotle.
What's that?
Influenced by Aristotle.
Tremendously influenced by
So
Aristotle.
they had the question.
You had two groups of philosophers around Aristotle in a very general sense. You had the Arab materialists, Averroes, Al-Farabi, Al-Ghazali, etc., of which Averroes was probably the most sophisticated. These were protectors of Aristotelian manuscripts and commentators on Aristotle, because remember the library was in Alexandria, right? And the Christian dogma did not really want to read Aristotle. Yeah. Neoplatonism fit much better. You had a two-tiered universe, you could do heaven and hell instead of reality and appearance. You could do all these kind of things with the Platonic theories of forms, right? And, in a way. And melded very nicely into the Judaic Christian codes, right? And especially the Christian of the church. And Philo of Alexander was a Neoplatonist all the way up to Plotinus, all the way forward. And St. Thomas had to go back and reread Aristotle because of this entry of Aristotle back into the Scholastics. That was the other version of the Scholastics. Aristotle was being read, especially the metaphysics, right?
Okay.
In this period. So you also had William of Ockham. You had people in the English-speaking world, but you also had the Italian, Duns Scotus, Aquinas. These were monsters. He was known as the subtle doctor. Yes.
Subtle, although you could get burned at the stake.
St. Thomas Aquinas.
Didn't Al-Farabi refer to Aristotle as the master?
Yes. Yes.
They're
The
showing
first teacher.
the Passion of Joan of Arc at
Dreyer's film.
yeah.
Yeah. That's the first time I.
Film form.
Yeah, good story about that. The first time I ever taught in a class, I was asked by a professor. It was a course on film and novel, and he said he wasn't going to be able to make the thing, and that the film had not come in. I think it was a film by Schlondorf, the young Torless, that we were reading alongside the Sorrows of young Bertha and stuff like that,
Fair
and
tear.
made into made into a film. So anyway, he calls me up and he tells me, look, I can't make it. Will you go by this other professor's house? He has a copy of The Passion of Joan of Arc. So literally he had an actual copy of the Carl Theodor Dreyer film. And I'll go over to his house, pick up the film and show it. Antoine Artaud is in
Like
the film.
Unreal?
It's,
Reel to reel.
It's on Filmstruck, you can stream
Oh
it
yeah,
now.
no, I love that film. Yeah,
Well,
I
Falconetti,
think he
you
likes
know,
the real
the rumor is that he abused her to get that performance.
really.
He
Well,
tortured her.
it's known to happen, Chris. You know, I'm sorry.
There's a book to be written about directors and their actresses.
Why don't you do that? Yeah, we'll consult. Yeah, I'll keep the balance. I'm just teasing. Have you seen the Polanski, the Venus in Furs?
No, that's new, a new one?
He did it about 3-4 years ago. He
Oh,
directed it. He found an actor that looked like him as a young man, but he has his wife play Wanda.
Oh, really?
And Wanda comes in off the street for the part in a play, and complete rural reversals. It's very good. I got in big trouble talking to some women friends, but it's a great film. Yeah,
Artaud, the Antonin Artaud is
Antoine.
Antoine?
Yeah,
He's in the movie.
yes, he plays one of the judges.
One of the priests.
Yeah, the
young
priests. Well, they're
sympathetic
judges. They're
priest.
judges. Yeah, in the film, right? Taking a
No,
verdict.
they're not judges.
They're
they
not?
They help her. They bring her.
Isn't he in the court scene when they have they're in the?
No, he comes to her cell.
Oh, he does. Okay. Lacan went to Artaud's cell.
I'm sure he helped a lot.
You know, supposedly...
You got kicked out of the movement too, right?
Supposedly the story about that film is that it was, at the time, they made him edit it, the church made him edit it.
Right.
And, but they found an original copy later on in an insane asylum.
Huh. Well, the scene, the final, the passion, the face, later in the film, reminds me very much of what Claude Chabrol did with one of Isabelle Huppert's first role, Violette, if you've ever seen that.
You talking about Falconetti?
No, I'm talking about in Dreyer's Passion of Joan of Arc.
That's Falconetti.
Yeah, Falconetti, right, yeah. Yeah, but I mean, I'm talking about the director, Chabrol, I'm sorry.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm talking about Claude Chabrol's remake of The Passion of Joan of Arc is really the surrealist story of Violette Nozier, who kills her parents in an act of, against the bourgeois mentality of the family. Because, it's a very interesting film. And it's Isabelle Huppert's first major role. And she's extraordinarily...
That's a remake of...
What's it called?
Violette.
That's a remake of Joan of Arc?
Well, I'm just saying he's
Bresson
influenced.
did a
I didn't
remake.
say it. I didn't say it's a remake. No.
Robert-
I know Robert Bresson made a new remake.
Did his own Joan
I'm
of
talking
Arc.
about an influence of the imaging of the martyr and the woman as
Oh.
martyr. That's all I'm saying.
All right.
No, I don't mean the remake of Joan of Arc, but I know the Bresson bit. His best film was Pickpocket. I love that film.
You like that?
And for phenomenology, his writing on cinema is
Yeah.
incredibly good. He wrote a beautiful book, Notes on Cinematography. Brilliant on all these versions of types of scene and more. Yeah. By Bresson. Yeah. Another great filmmaker. Also, Diary of a Country Priest.
That's
He did.
Renoir.
Yeah, Renoir did. Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's right. It's George Bernadotte. Right, the novel. Yeah. Amazing stuff what these people were doing. What the Catholic Church could produce. Pasolini. Bresson.
Foucault, right? Foucault.
Yeah. Well, he was a member of the party. He left the party because this was censored. You know that story? That's the reason he left the party. He left the PCF because this book was censored. It's not on the reading list.
Who, Foucault?
Yeah. Because being in time was not, yeah. You can see a lot of Foucault here. You
Yes.
start reading, very carefully, you begin to see, tremendous influence on Foucault here. Yeah. You have to think about what is this allowing us for research too? How can you do this? Because you can take sections of this and do all kinds of amazing stuff. Urban studies, architecture. I think almost every field, it has tremendous orientation value and heuristic value. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Okay. So let me go on. So the hermeneutical. Let's go down the page. I don't want to just read keep reading the sections in its entirety. But anyway, the second paragraph, page 93. In our exposition of the problem of worldliness, we refer to the importance of gaining proper access to this phenomenon. Thus, in our critical discussion of the Cartesian point of departure, we must ask what kind of being of design we should fix upon as the approximate kind of access to that being with whose being as extensia Descartes equates the being of the world. The sole genuine access to this being is knowing. Okay? The sole genuine access to this being is knowing. Intellectio, in the sense of the kind of knowledge we get in, here we go, mathematics and physics. Mathematical knowledge is regarded as the one way of apprehending beings which can always be certain of the secure possession of the being of the beings which it apprehends. Whoever has...
Sorry.
Yeah.
This provides the certainty for Descartes.
Absolutely, it's gonna
Mathematics
be-
provides the
yes,
certainty which,
Right. Well, certainty is provided by the cogito.
the
finally.
ability to achieve.
Well, the only thing that gives you certainty, mathematics is in its beauty and its precision for Descartes, but the only thing that ultimately gives certainty is the cogito. Not the sum, but the cogito. Because even after you doubt, you go through this kind of radical skepticism, right? I'll put this on the sheet as well, I guess. Anybody know the film The Devils of London? That's about Father Urbain, who was a big womanizer, priest, and they burned him at the stake. Yeah, but anyway, Descartes knew Father Urbain, and they brought Descartes in to argue against him because this guy was really sharp. And then there was another guy, a counterfeiter named Chandelier, who was expert at counterfeiting. He was kind of like the Bitcoin guy of his time, right? Anyway, he was brought in too. These were the radical skeptics of the time. But anyway, so the only thing, since you brought up certainty, right? The only thing that yields certainty is ultimately the I think. That I am a cogitan, I am a thinking thing, first of all. I am a thing that thinks. He uses mechanical language in some ways, and yeah, he does use mechanical language. So this is the only thing that we can be certain of, because what's going on are two forms of doubt in the method. The hyperbolic, the extreme doubt. Right? You doubt everything so far that nothing is left to exist, right? And in this hyperbolic doubt, all you can be certain of, it is I who am thinking these thoughts that are still certain. That's it. That's how he gets to this conclusion. Right? It is only I. If you practice this kind of exercise with yourself, you doubt everything out of existence. You raise, you put everything in abeyance, right? Then the question is, well, who is performing the operation of the abeyance, right? And ultimately, what can you be certain of? Only that you have the thoughts, the thinking thing, right? This is what he's doing. The other kind of doubt is the step-by-step doubt, and the methodological doubt, right? So this is another form of the doubt, right? So both of this is, the hyperbolic is to take on the skeptics. The skeptics have the methodological doubt, right? The radical skeptics of the day, right? Whereas Descartes has to push it to the extreme to become the extreme skeptic to get back to something has certainty in the world. Understand? I mean, you know that, yeah. So the mathematics for him was the most certain, right, of the methodological precepts, right, in terms of the doubt. So he says, I have to found a new foundation for the sciences, and this will be on universalis mathesis. This is the new foundation on which the world of science will be founded, right? The new philosophical principle. Yeah, so this was first philosophy at work. Okay. From this, everything else comes. So it fits with the calculated rationality, the processes, the dominion over nature. All of these things become, metaphorized in Descartes, and at the same time, we begin, where we should be radical skeptics, right? We should be skeptical, in some ways, and radical skeptical of things, right? Until we get it. So why is he going for certainty? Well, because this is the age of probability, right? This is the beginning of probability theory, Bernoulli and others, right? This is the emergence of probability theory during the 17th century. 17th century. And why is he looking for certainty again? Why does he want to ground philosophy again? What occurs? The Copernican turn, the revolution. The orbit of the planets is published. Scientifically shown that we live in a heliocentric universe and no longer a geocentric universe.
And the ships,
The major ship.
the
Yeah.
merchant ships.
What about the merchant ships?
He wants a certainty that he can calculate the comings and goings of the merchant ships.
Oh, yeah.
Because this is the beginning of capitalism.
Yes. Well, he's already in the manufacturing age.
Okay.
I think this is part of the certainty too, that the method itself, and actually, who's very good on this is Tony Negre in a book called Political Descartes, about what Descartes' role historically was in the history of philosophy and then capitalism, and what the certainty was about was also just what you said about the merchant ships, but also the manufacturing sector of capital, that you're going through both mercantile capital into the first manufacturing phase. So it's very interesting when you begin to read philosophy alongside what's happening both scientifically and its historical and social formation.
Well, Shakespeare.
This is dialectics. Yeah, go ahead with Shakespeare.
No, I mean,
Yeah.
in,
Yeah, no,
in Othello, the ability to predict whether a ship is going to
Yes,
come in with its cargo
Yes,
or sink.
absolutely.
And,
yes, but this was also
Life and
Lloyd's
death.
of London
Yeah.
is sort of founded here. Great book on this by Robert Brenner, the economist, called Merchants and Revolution. It's a brilliant book on this period, and especially in England. Especially in England. He wrote The Boom and the Bust, and is a contributor. One school of economics, right? Robert
Yeah.
Brenner,
Yeah.
whose son is here, but he's in California. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Bob Brenner.
Yeah, he was a follower of Rigi, or sort of connected with the Rigi, I believe. Or,
He's one of the guiding lights in Solidarity.
who are Rigi? Or
No.
Oh, Origi, or
Origi.
Giovanni Origi.
Giovanni
Yeah, yeah,
Origi.
yeah.
Origi.
Yeah,
Origi's at,
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
dead.
No, he is
His
dead,
wife
yeah.
just died too. Very
Oh,
nice
no,
person.
really?
Yeah.
Because I have a friend-
Silver Beverly.
Oh, gee, because they
Yeah,
started an
Rigi was
institute
at
in
Johns Hopkins.
Yeah, Johns Hopkins. They were
in
both
Johns
there.
Hopkins.
Yeah.
I have a friend who's a South African who's a fellow and was just visiting there.
Yeah,
And-
no,
and-
she died, unfortunately, Beverly
Oh,
Silver.
that must have been after he left.
Yeah,
because he was
yeah,
just
yeah,
there.
yeah, just recently. Yeah. But he was a giant too, the long 20th
yeah.
century.
Yeah.
Adam
Right.
Smith in Beijing, worth reading. I'm not saying, this is not the dent, in a way, but I mean, certainly worth reading. You can read it in a different light after this, because then you can start bringing in, certain kind of different category and thinking to these people in a way. It becomes a regional science, but very important regional science that you can begin to look at,
Right. He tried to do the comparing why industrialization happened in Europe but
Right.
it happened differently in China.
Right,
you know.
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, very smart. Yeah. So anyway, going back to this, since Arto brought up the key word, certainty. So this is the drive during this period, right? Is the drive toward certainty for Descartes to argue against all of his other, contemporaries, right? And of course, the guarantee in which Heidegger's talking about, and maybe I should have done this before we read the passage, is the insurance policy is God as the outside external, extensia. That's why he's going on about this. You have this guarantee from the outside. And the argument is ens perfectum. Me, how can I have an idea of perfection when I'm not perfect? Where did this idea come from? This is the level of the argument there, right?
Good question.
And it must come from outside by somebody or something or some whatever. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, or perfectum, right? So anyway, this is kind of like how this is definitely how this is, unfolding here. So I mean, the thing to remember here is this hyperbolic doubt. And one thing I really like about Adorno, he understands hyperbole and exaggeration extremely well. He understands this in terms of have to push the dialectic to this thing. You'll see stuff on Descartes in his lectures 13 and 14 in the Introduction to Dialectics. So you can go back here. It'll probably very much deepen, the understanding, both that lecture from Adorno, those 2 or 3 lectures on Descartes and positivism within dialectics, and what Heidegger is doing here. The main thing here is what he's going to engage are the 2 levels, the res cogiton, the thinking thing, and the res extensa, right? The object world and the thinking world, right? Together, and world behind that. But the world that Heidegger has in mind is more than the res extensa. It's no longer Dasein as space, spatial relations. He wants to keep this in terms of the world, right? The world is more of an important thing, right? So he's going to go on the spatiality of Dasein, right? Okay, so let me see. Maybe I can round it out a little bit, and then we'll pick up with this next week. And then since some people weren't here, maybe we'll just say we will still go to 110, and then maybe go on to all the way up to Dasein as attunement, right? The being the they self, the Das Man, which again I think is code word for Nazi.
What?
Nazi. Das Man.
Page 110 to where?
Well, at 110 we were supposed to finish for today, but why don't we go from all the way up to 130 for next week? Is that too much? Yeah, you're probably right. Why don't we just go to, all right. All right, why don't we just read the first section on attunement? I mean, the existential analytic, okay? Why don't we just begin there? Up to 117, 118, let me see.
Okay, that's doable.
Yeah, we can do that carefully. So we have another, basically 20 pages of world spatiality and all that. But let me just highlight a couple of things going first. There's a nice section on resistance on page 95, on hardness again. And then we have the things we have to show. On page 98, this is section 100. Tamara, in your book, section 21, 100 in the side. Oh, you have it
I
open?
actually have that. I just didn't write
Okay.
it. He's
Okay. Why was the phenomena of world passed over at the beginning of the ontological tradition decisive for us? Explicitly in Parmenides, where does the constant recurrence of the passing over come from? Why was this concept not used, right? World. And this is a very important concept for Heidegger. Again, I think world is interesting, as I mentioned last week, for therapeutic purposes, to think about being in a world, right? It's very important. Why do inner-worldly beings take the place of the phenomena, thus passed over as the ontological theme? Why are these beings initially found in nature? And why does the rounding out of such an ontology of the world experience as necessary take place with the help of the phenomena of value? So you're going to see also a little bit at the end here of this section we're going to see a little bit of more of Kant and the phenomena of orientation and space, also in Kant. So let me see what else I can say here. You see very good things on nearness. This is very important on page 100, sections 102. On nearness, and in the regions, very, very important. And again, handiness. And then you have the whole sense of distancing and de-distancing in space, section 23, those two sections of spatiality of the world, and then finally the spatiality of Dasein and space. So again, for Heidegger that I mentioned last week, we are not going to be doing this so much. He'll criticize this, the Zeitraum, the time-space problematic and complex of Kant. We're going to be going much more into a different level, and maybe we'll talk about this next week. Maybe we'll go to the sections on time and then read retrospectively so you can see this in a different light, right? So the Zeitraum, this is going to be, and I am going to claim that he's instead got a topology going on here, place instead of Ram, or topos, right? He's going to be talking about topos, place. And this is his notion of what the Greeks had before modern science, right? In a way, you would think of place, not topos, rather than of space. The Greeks had no concept of space. So this is going to be interesting to see this kind of division going on. All right. And then what I'd like to do, yes, we'll get through that next week. More of world, space, time. Small subject matter, right? And then we'll maybe move on to section 75. Yeah, we're about 1/4 through, and we're not even through.
And the tough part's really
tough part's coming. Yeah. The impossibility of grounding and grasping Dasein as a whole.
And this isn't finished. This is just the first part of the project.
That's right. Remember that. Yeah. No, this is very, very. We're going to get. So we'll be getting more into some things that may concern us. At least on the ground today. Such as the existential analytic. What does it mean to be? What does it mean to exist? What does it mean to authentically exist? The criticisms of that authentic existence, or that politics of authenticity that Adorno and others, criticized, including Pierre Bourdieu and others today still. And another way, what is he really going towards, And then ultimately with the turn, is there an eclipse of the self? Is there an eclipse of the self in which, being as time takes the privilege, everything, and we become mere vessels through this through this, right? And what does freedom mean in this context? So we'll take on some common, concepts, but see how Heidegger works with them. The freedom, the letting things be as they are, and of course go into this structure of care. That's going to be very important, the structure of care. So what I'll do, I think I'm going to do this for myself as well. I'll try to write up, some of the crucial concepts during the week. I may have some time, and maybe just, produce a kind of narrative of what we're doing, right? might help us going along. But I still like the chart, in the sense that right now we're dealing with world, with the ready to hand and the objectively present, and now we're going into the being in the world and the uncoveredness in the present event. And we talked a little bit later, to go back to what you said, equipment and concern come up later, in the ready to hand,
Okay.
right? Yeah, and then we're going to talk about being with and solicitude. And right now we're talking about, we're going to be, the everyday manifestations. So anyway, we're reading on 5 different columns, if you will. The existentiality, the traits, the derivatives, and the everyday and modifications. We're reading on all these levels at once, hopefully, and then we're, going to be engaging, the Dasein as the existential analytic. I do not think the Frankfurt School exceeded the existential analytic, particularly Marcuse. I don't think Adorno ever really went into this enough to engage it. He had a different version. His subjectivity is where you break through the conditions of the subject. Adorno is a real precursor of Derrida. Derrida is a combination, in my opinion, in some ways, philosophically speaking, of both Adorno's negative dialectics and Heidegger's destruction, phenomenological destruction. And it's a very interesting kind of
I've
combination.
never put Adorno with Derrida. That's
Okay.
something I've never thought.
Okay. Well, we'll maybe we can engage Stanley on that level a little bit. See if he'll bite, and he'll tell you a story. He'll tell you a story about Irvine, and so, being in Irvine. Okay. So, and feel free to bring questions. I don't know. I know it's very dense. I know it's preponderous because it's German being translated, and Heidegger's very good at hyphenating, repeating, but he does think through things. You can see, what for the sake of, how does something function? All these things are going through his mind when he's beginning this conceptual nexus. So it's good to kind of think with him as much as you can, in a way. Let the, someone would say, let the resistances down a little bit, think with them, it's not going to, yeah. And there's a whole good section on world that I did not go through. We talked a little bit about reference and science, but I'll go back to that because I'm very interested also in the language question. Really what is Heidegger doing here? Ultimately he'll say language is the house of being, and we speak being, or being now speaks us. Even more so. Being speaks us. Derrida didn't say that one. Being doesn't speak us.
Dense. I take it he didn't
Did
leave.
being write us? What?
Heidegger didn't leave his brain to science, right?
Did he leave his brain to science? No, he didn't like
Since
science.
science doesn't think. He didn't
I think
leave
Heisenberg went to see him once.
He didn't
He did?
leave his
Yeah.
brain to
Yeah, a lot of people went to see him. It's pretty amazing. And he was very, Josh, he was good. George Brock loved him.
Yeah.
George Brock, the sculptor, loved him. Yeah. There's a great
Yeah.
photograph of the two of them together. I think I'll have it at home. Of Brock smoking a pipe and Heidegger just standing there. Little short man. But yeah,
Little
Brock
peasant,
was a
little
towering figure, but you can
Little
see.
peasant. Oh,
Yeah. Okay.
whatever. Okay.
So, okay, so, yeah.
See you next time.
So I'll send out an email, with the readings and anything I might come up with to make this a little more accessible.
I'm gonna be-
But it's
I'm gonna be
about
there next
access. He's really about access. He's about access to this being, that he's really talking about. He's trying to, again, plow the field, run up, right? And then, kind of get to the clearing. Yeah.
I was reading this, the American physicist David Bohm, who was kind of like philosophically
Yeah.
attuned.
Yeah.
And he said that because he studied with Einstein and he knew Heisenberg. He said these older generation, first generation quantum physicists,
Right.
like the Germans, Niels Bohr, the Dutch,
Right.
Einstein, David Bohm.
Yeah.
These people really did spend time thinking about these philosophical questions.
They did.
They
yeah.
weren't just physicists
yeah.
the way they are now,
No,
like
no.
the big names now.
Philosophy and physics had a very ongoing relationship in a way, yes. Yeah, yeah, on both sides. The philosophers thought about physics too.
It's
Yeah,
different.
They don't do that
We
today.
can totally say it's different
Yeah.
now. It's much,
Yeah.
there's a break. You know, there's
Right.
well, the philosophers don't talk about philosophy either.
There's no
I'm
break
making
at
a
all.
paragraph on that. from
All
Gary
cats
Gray.
get rained on.
I sat in a Saul
I'm
Kripke
gonna
lecture
be late
once,
next week.
and
In at 4. I'll be
he's
here
like,
at
"What?
4.
He's eating a
But
cheesecake,
I'll
spilling the cheese all over himself."
I mean, like,
And
I
everyone was
have
like, "He's so
people that work with me.
bye, guys.
Okay, bye. Take care.